Hey everyone, welcome back to the Global Medical Device Podcast. My name is Etienne Nichols. I'm the host for today's episode. Today, with me to talk about biocompatibility and an episode that we want to kind of call the biocompatibility brief, because we're not going to get super deep, although hopefully we will get into some things that will be applicable and useful. But with me today to talk about that is Marina Daineko. Am I saying your name correctly?
Correctly, yeah, all good.
No, is that correct?
Daineko, yep,
Daineko. Okay.
yep.
Marina Daineko is a passionate explorer turned medtech expert with a deep-rooted love for chemistry and a mission to make medical devices safer through rigorous biological evaluation. Her journey began with curiosity and evolved into specialization in biocompatibility, where she sits at the intersection of science, regulation, and patient safety. So she has a strong background in chemistry and hands-on experience with a wide range of medical devices, and she supports teams in planning, executing biological evaluations, addressing regulatory expectations, and helps with standards like ISO 10993-1. And her approach is grounded, strategic, and practical. And in fact, if you want to go learn a little bit more about maybe her personal thoughts on biocompatibility, I would definitely recommend following her on LinkedIn because she constantly posts really good educational posts there. One other thing I'll say, in recognition of her contributions, Marina was nominated for the Women in Tech Award in 2023 and named one of the top 25 MedTech leading voices on LinkedIn. So she offers that expert support in preparing biological evaluation plans and reports for medical devices, whether you're updating legacy documentation or building a strategy from ground up. She's uh, uh, I'm really excited to talk to her today. What did I miss and did I get anything wrong? Welcome today.
No, no, all good, all good. Hello, everyone. Hi, Tian, and really happy to be there.
So glad you're with us today. So, why don't we talk a little bit about biocompatibility, what exactly it is, and why it's critical in medical device development?
Yeah, absolutely. It's my favorite topic to talk about. So, biocompatibility, or we also can say like biological safety or biological evaluation, is actually a check where the medical devices are safe when they are used by users, by someone who is not very healthy, for instance. And in this way, we are kind of doing audit, checking whether there are any adverse reactions of body to this medical device. Just imagine that, for instance, you have like a wearable device that just like, okay, everyone I believe has a clock. So I would like Apple Watch, for
Yeah,
instance, right?
watch. Yeah.
So we are, yeah, yeah. For instance, just imagine that you are wearing this Apple Watch like whole day, and when you are just need to recharge it, you notice that there is some allergy, and oops, there is bad reactions that we need
Mm,
to like assess and kind of prevent. But Apple Watch is kind of okay, but imagine implant, for instance, and during some time after implantation, you know, someone noticed that something is wrong, so the person felt bad or there are some bad analysis and all these things. So here we are to prevent such cases and assess and have our medical devices safe for use.
So let's talk about a little bit one layer deeper because when I think about biocompatibility, or like you said, I actually like the biological safety. I like that description a little
Yeah.
bit better personally because it's biocompatibility makes sense. Okay, is it compatible with my biology? But biological safety, yeah, I guess it's just more intuitive. If someone's new to
Uh-huh.
this space and they're looking at this and say, okay, well, okay, we need to do a biocomp test. It sounds like it's just a I'm going to go through my checklist of everybody
Very
has to do this,
straightforward.
that, or the other. What does it actually involve? And I'm going to just take a stab in my own mind because if I think about it, like, okay, if it's touching my skin, I want to know that the surface contact. If it's emitting radiation, I might think about that. Or what all does it actually involve, and what's the thought process that you go through?
Oh, I love this question because I believe that everyone who is involved into biological evaluation and within the industry has their eye ticking, you know, when they can hear this checkbox approach because,
Yes.
okay, that's why I like biological safety or biological evaluation because we have to evaluate and where to start. We have to start with the intended use. I really love saying that, for instance, in Bible, everything starts with the word. In medical device industry, everything starts with the intended use, okay? So we need to check. how the device is used on the patients. What are our patients? Because they might be just, for instance, pregnant women, or they might be pediatrics, or like neonates even, So as well as how long this medical device is used. And here is a trick actually, because just imagine infusion set. It's a bag filled with a pharma, and this pharma should flow directly into human body, right? And this bag together with pharma can be used like during like 7 days, but for 1 or 2 hours. So we have to consider cumulative effect here, because it's not just like 1 hour or even 2 hours interaction. No, it's more. So then we have also to look into from what medical device is made of, because just know your medical device is also like a big words, to understand what are the hazards associated with this medical device. Because as I provided my example with Apple Watch that have just contact with intact skin. By the way, Apple Watch is not
Yeah.
classified as medical device, just like example, okay? And implant, so they would have very different hazards. And here is the trick that we have to assess this hazard and all the information we find about this medical device. Okay, and only if this information is not enough, for instance, we did our homework, we did literature review, we assessed all the papers available, historical testing, etc., etc. If all this data is not enough and we still have some concerns, then we can go into testing. But again, testing is not like checkbox. We need to assess it first, evaluate it first, and then make conclusion and set up testing strategy here.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm going to just throw one thing out because I don't want the audience to, get us those emails saying, hey, the Apple Watch, we know it's not a medical device, but the heart monitoring part is a de novo. And so we know that. Just let's leave that alone.
Yes,
We'll just throw
yes.
that out there just so
Yeah.
people can know that. But what I'll also say is, I really like your approach and how you said the intended use, because there's a few other things that I think about from a risk management perspective. What happens to that device? And we're just going to go on with the watch or something. Let's just say you have an aluminum watch that's anodized
Okay.
and it gets
Yep.
all scratched up and the anodization gets worn off, perhaps, and now you have bare
Yep.
aluminum. Is there any issue there? And so it's not just, and maybe this is more of a question than a statement. When you have a device that has some kind of surface treatment, whether it's anodization, carburization, whatever, and that wears off, do you have to consider the wear and tear throughout the life cycle of the device? And how does that play in?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, there are several aspects of this question. Okay, so first of all, we have to consider medical device in its final finished form and do all our evaluation and together with testing when required. I just would like to highlight it, when required. Okay, on this final finished form, meaning like all possible processing, sterilization if applicable, etc., etc. Okay. Then secondly, surely, and especially, by the way, I like this question because it highlights updates to ISO 10993-1 that would be published hopefully soon, that we have to consider biological safety of medical device through whole life cycle of the medical device. And even there are special parts of ISO 10993 suite where we have to consider all these possible wear-offs and other things that may be with our medical device, because surely they may impact human tissue and our body, for instance, when they are leaked or with some mechanical breaks, etc., etc. So yes, we have to consider it absolutely 100%. And it's not too easy, to be honest. It's pretty tricky because we need to do our evaluation properly and consider what can be percentage of this degradation, for instance, just an example. Yeah.
Yeah. And total side note, those of you interested in learning more from Marina and some of her co-conspirators on the biocompatibility world, we're actually sort of tentatively planning a webinar in the future. Maybe I don't know, October, depending on when you're listening to this right now. We'll try to have a link in the show notes. So if you're interested in attending that webinar to get a little bit more deep dive into some of the changes that are happening. And I don't know if you want to speak to some of the things that you're thinking about with that. It may be a little bit too soon here, but
No, just maybe we would be not only about updates, but the importance of chemical characterization, actually, and what are the biggest issues here, like, for instance, with solvents, when we consider hexane as a solvent, and for many medical devices, it's not very clinically relevant. Okay, so we would discuss with invited guests, and it would be kind of panel discussion. So I highly recommend to attend.
Yeah. Okay. But back to our conversation, when you're talking
Yep.
about those things, um, it does sound like it can be a little bit more of an art than a science. And that flies in the face of what some people, especially scientists, they say no science, all the way. But there are some things where you have some kind of balance with, there's a regulatory expectation, there's a scientific justification for doing or not doing something. So
Mhm.
can you talk about balancing that scientific data with the regulatory expectations, and when you're going through a new device or assessing the biocompatibility?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I really love your questions because look, we can't just take the data and throw to the regulators and forget about it. No way. We have to connect the dots. We have to take the hand of our reviewer and go through full biological evaluation. I mean, documenting in such a way that this person who reviews our documents can understand with preferably without additional questions, okay, what's going on here. That's why it's so important to have very logical documents and presenting, for instance, results, providing justification why we decided to go this way exactly. So it's all about connecting these puzzles and telling the story. Storytelling is applicable for biological evaluation as well. And I would say here that biological evaluation is not just pure science, it's about communication, okay? So
Mm.
because we have to communicate with different departments and stakeholders to gather the information, to analyze this information, because, okay, let me just tell it, ISO 14971 says that risk management shall be done by a cross-functional team. So we are not alone here, okay? And also communicating, when we describe it in the documentation, so it shall be self-explanatory. There shouldn't be some additional questions, okay? We have to provide references, we have to provide justification and make it very easy to understand, because very different people can have a look into our documents. So hopefully I managed to answer your question.
Yeah, I think so. When you say it like that, or you kind of spell it out, and you've kind of talked about some of the specific tests, and maybe we can get into a little bit more of the specific tests, I suppose. But
Mhm.
when I think about this, it sounds relatively straightforward. When you say, okay, it's a communication, you tell the story, you use a cross-functional team. These
Yeah.
all make sense. So, what are the pitfalls? Why? I mean, you have a good following on LinkedIn talking about these things where people are learning from you continually. So it's not as if it's just a one and done situation. It's not as open in book, or it's not simple or easy to accomplish as maybe it sounds on the surface. What are some of the reasons people mess it up?
Oh, a lot of reasons. I actually treat biological evaluation kind of detective, where I have some data and I need to connect this data all together. Okay, there are so many aspects to highlight here, because surely there might be some gaps. For instance, some data is not available, like technical data sheet, or like specific type of material used, or for instance, there is no predicate device and we can't leverage this information comparing with predicate device or with, for instance, even competitor device. And uh, common pitfalls, I would say it's absence of proper planning, because according to standard ISO 10993-1, we have to have biological evaluation plan and plans in place, right? Because we can't do anything properly and have acceptable results if we don't have this acceptance criteria set up in advance. So I would say biological evaluation plan is very important, and we have to have into it. Then going into details, because again, I face several times when I'm requesting usually a lot of information, and regarding suppliers, regarding raw materials, technical data sheet, how many samples were sold during a specific period, like a lot of different information. And for instance, I can find the gaps, and it's important to go even deeper and find what are, for instance, disinfectants that are used to clean manufacturing lines. That's important. For
Yeah.
instance, work instruction may not list these solutions, but we need to find what are used to be able to assess it, because there might be as a case when this disinfectant solution go to medical device and then to the patient. So it depends. We have to assess all these things and be attentive. Yeah. For instance, again, just recently I have got results for cytotoxicity, and it was a component that contains silver ions, and I have got 0 for cytotoxicity. And by the way, silver ions are very known to cause cytotoxic effect. And then I was like, oh wait, what's going on here? Why we have 0? Because I was expecting to have like 3, but at least 2, but like 3 or even maybe 4, and I have got 0. So I had some additional questions like, hey guys, I was expecting to have a bit different results because of silver ions. What's going on here? And we have to be very attentive to these details as well.
Mm.
So it's just several ones, but I would say they are most common, like to be attentive to the details. Don't believe anyone, just check everything, go as deep as you could to find this information, and don't be shy to ask questions, and prepare your biological evaluation plan. Yeah.
I love that specific example, I guess, because that just kind of highlights the need for the critical thinking side of things. And
Absolutely.
I I want to go into a little bit more details on some of these things and maybe how companies can miss the real signals. But I want to just kind of do a quick sidebar, and you can comment on this or not if you like. But I think
Okay.
of obviously biocompatibility. We think of physical devices, and as a mechanical engineer, that's where I prefer to live my life with physical devices. But and so feel free to punt. We can move on from this if you want.
Mhm.
But software is a medical device. They would probably typically kind of shy away from anything like this. But if I think about biological safety, what about devices or software that changes the biology of the brain from a neurological standpoint, like AI or different neurological? And if that doesn't fall, that's totally fine. It just popped into my head, and I have
You
no
know,
filter.
I am kind of following Neuralink because these brain interfaces are so impressive for me. And because, look, when we have like software as a medical device and standalone software, biological safety is not applicable at all to it. Why? Because by definition, biological safety is applicable to medical devices that have direct or indirect contact with the patient.
Yep.
Direct, yeah, it's very obvious. It's like this, like Apple Watch. By the way, Apple Watch is not medical device, but yeah.
Sure, yeah.
And and indirect contact, if for instance we have if we have this infusion set like bag filled in with pharma and the tube, and pharma is going from starting from bag through the tube to the patient. So the bag and tube have both indirect contact with a body. So it's like, yeah. And about software, it doesn't have any contact with body. So that's why we don't consider biological safety. But
Sure.
these brain interfaces, okay, they're very interesting. Why? Because they have this they have direct connection with the brain, and it's very interesting how biological evaluation is assessed here. I saw some reports regarding clinical evaluation and studies on monkeys. So there are
Yeah.
quite a lot of questions here, but I'm excited to see how the science is developing.
Yeah.
And surely, right now, I mean, from my experience, there are very popular devices, so-called Internet of Medical Things, IoMT,
Hmm.
because they're wearable. It means that you wear this device somewhere, I mean, on your chest or on your hand, on your leg, and this device gathers different signals from your body, like, for instance, about your breath, about your heartbeat, uh, oxygen level, so on and so forth. So, and these devices are they are classified as medical devices, and they are about future, about robots, about all these things. So I'm very excited about it as well. But surely we have to assess biological safety of such medical devices because they have direct contact with our bodies.
Yeah. And I'll get back to our original conversation. I guess
Yep.
I can't help but think so with my kids and so on. I think about the effect that and it's not really the same. It's not biocompatibility related necessarily, but with things like social media, AI,
Yeah,
all these
yeah,
different things, changing the way our brain is shaped. That I think someday, if I look at the past of the FDA, for example, with
yeah,
CDRH, the Center for Devices and Radiological Health, the
yeah,
history as to why they're over radiological is interesting. It wasn't
yeah.
just because it was medical devices, it's because there were radiological devices out there that were harming people. Maybe I'm getting onto a different subject. So let's get back to it. Let's come back to where we belong. I do want to know how you approach uh, raw data analysis. You already mentioned some with those silver ions and so on.
Yeah.
Is it different than how you approach data analysis in other fields? It sounds like you really draw from a lot of previous or a well of knowledge.
Yes, because I have my background in chemistry, it helps me a lot to understand what's going on here, actually, and have a look and understand, like, okay, I mean, basics even. There is like polypropylene, but what type of polypropylene? Whether it's like mixture with something or like what are possible residuals in this polymer, okay? Or if we are talking about some polymers, okay, what was the reaction to produce this specific polymer? Was it like polymerization or polycondensation? Because there
Mm,
might be different residuals on it. And when I'm looking into this raw data, I'm really like thinking about it and describing it within my biological evaluation. Because again, it's very, very important to not be shy and ask questions, even if these questions are not very welcome, if I can put it in this way, okay?
yeah,
As
because
well as yeah, yeah,
well, I was just gonna say, I would imagine a lot of people are looking for a pass fail. Just tell me if it passed or failed. But it sounds like it's a lot more nuanced. There's context. There's
exactly. Exactly,
patterns. Yeah.
exactly. And for me, it's exactly the beauty of biological evaluation because you can't just copy and paste some information from one biological evaluation to another. No, it doesn't work in this way because, again, we have to start from the very beginning, meaning from the intended use. We have to know our devices, like what materials are used, what disinfectants, what processes, etc., etc. And then we have to assess available information as well as available test results through this prism. So that's the beauty. That's why we always have a lot of fun here in this field. So
Yeah. I'm curious if you have any specific examples of when this wasn't done well. And maybe later on you found out there were some biocompatibility risks. I know we keep going back to the watch that causes a rash or something like that, but anything specific to the medical device field that you've seen that you're able to share?
yeah, I want to share the example from The Bleeding Edge by
Ah, yeah.
Netflix. Maybe you have seen this video,
Hmm.
this movie. It was really, really great. And a friend of mine, Angelina, showed me this movie, and I was impressed. And really great example that I would like to mention here is the Assure. Assure is a device for women contraception, and it was sold for a long time. And it was found out later by women that this device causes adverse effects such as very different. So I just, yeah, even death. I mean, it was
Yeah.
super like sad. And unfortunately, so ladies provided their feedback, like post-market surveillance, hello,
Right.
but and complaints and all the things, but it didn't change anything. But in the end of the day, thankfully to their organization, because women just united and they started to be loud about this device, okay? And in the end of the day, this device was cancelled from the production and actually sales. So here I would say that we have to be very cautious, especially with the devices that are implanted or are used for a long, long period. Because look, one thing, I really love this example. I had even a post on LinkedIn about it. For instance, I applied a tissue mask to my face, and when I get rid of it, I found out that I have allergy. Okay, everything was like red,
Oh,
rash, and all those things. So it's visible. It was like immediate. I just applied it, threw off, and here we go. Okay, but for long term, when, for instance, I used to work at the lab and I worked with nickel solutions, and during the years, I have got kind of sensitization because I have got allergy on nickel. But because I worked with it during a long time period, it accumulated in my body. And that's why I have got such kind of reaction. So what I'm trying to say is that we have to be especially attentive to the medical device with long-term contact duration, because we can have some chemicals in our body accumulated because they are leaked from this medical device. And yeah, right now I'm really happy and excited to see that regulations and requirements to biological safety consider this aspect as well. And as I mentioned in the very beginning of our discussion about what I mentioned.
yeah. Just the
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, the examples of actual cases, I think that's really
Yeah,
valuable.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, you actually make me think of the accumulated exposure to what is it? I
Yes.
think latex gloves too. That can cause allergies as well, and I think that's something to think about. Yeah, there's lots.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Cumulative effect. Yeah, we have to consider it. And as I mentioned in the very beginning, with these infusion sets, okay, they can be used for a lifelong period. So we have to consider it and all possible chemicals that can go through this bag as well as tube to the body. So that's
yeah.
important.
I love the idea of thinking of it from the very, I don't know, the smallest component inside the device all the way to the time it gets thrown away. I look at that as kind of like the supply chain of your medical device. You know,
Yeah,
I deal a lot in design controls. So if you're designing a medical device, you have to design it to where you're thinking about, well, for example, maybe you have a device that a nurse is going to carry into a room and it's sterilized, but maybe she opens it up, gets it all ready at her desk, puts it in her pocket, then goes to the room. It's that you've kind of defeated a little bit of the purpose here. So you have to think about all the way through. And so in the manufacturing, you mentioned a few examples there. I love that. One of them that's very common that I experienced as a manufacturing engineer was the mold release in a
hmm
multi-cavity injection mold. You know, they
yeah,
spray something on the mold so that it'll easily come out of the cavity,
yeah,
and that can cause problems. I think you already know where I'm going with
yeah,
that. So, yeah, I think those are great examples. What you're the way you've described this, it makes me think of, you know, in the medical device industry, we talk about a risk-based approach to everything.
yeah,
We like a
yeah.
risk-based approach. Um, it feels like the focus is less in your mind, maybe less on what tests do we run and more what risks are we mitigating. Is that
Exactly.
accurate, or
Yes.
how would you describe? Yeah,
Absolutely, yes. Because look, we have right now in the current version of ISO 10931 very well-known table, where there is like classification of medical device as, I mean, as per biological safety, not like for instance, medical device regulation, as well as these biological effects like cytotoxicity, irritation, sensitization, etc. But their case here might be that, for instance, there might be hazards that are not mentioned within this table, but just thinking and applying common sense, we can find out them. For instance, if medical device is applicable for adults, we need to think that also, for instance, pregnant women can use it until it's mentioned in contraindications to this medical device. And from this perspective, we need to have a look and also consider developmental toxicity of this medical device, whether there would be any effects on pregnant women. And there are, yeah, so we have to apply common sense here. Surely standard helps us with it, but it's not about testing, it's understanding what are specific hazards associated with these specific medical devices produced within these specific processes, you know, and used as described within instruction for use. So it's we have to focus on it.
are you able to talk a little bit more about the risks associated with pregnant women? Because I feel like historically we just don't have a lot of data on that. How do you go about evaluating that?
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right that unfortunately there is no there is just a bit data regarding it. And for instance, when we found that, okay, we have to consider developmental toxicity, so we need to have a look into extractables and leachables and the chemical characterization and
Okay.
this aspect, especially, and I'm highlighting it, especially if we have long-term contact duration of this medical device with the patient, because again, talking about risk, we have to consider whether it contact with intact skin, and here we have low risk or high risk if we are talking about the implants. Okay, it's like first step what we have to consider here. Secondly, if it's implant like high risk with a long-term contact duration, we need to have look into extractables, leachables. What are potential chemicals that could leak from the medical device? And I don't know whether I need to explain a bit the difference between extractables and leachables,
Please
because
do.
leachables,
Yeah.
leachables, if something that can leak in normal conditions, when we have like 37 degrees C, if talking about European temperature, okay, so it's like clinically relevant, what can potentially go in actual clinical, during actual clinical use. And when we are talking about extractables, we are talking about all possible chemicals that could go at all. And this is very strict approach, and FDA, for instance, especially tends to consider it. And here we are using conditions that are not clinically relevant, but for instance, elevated temperature, like 15 degrees C. Our body temperature is 36 degrees C, and 50 degrees C is like elevated temperature, you
Yeah.
know? So, I mean, it's a bit too harsh, but
Sure.
okay. As well as like specific solvents like hexane, for instance, not similar to blood solution that is like clinically relevant, but okay. So here, talking about extractables and leachables, we have to analyze what are the chemicals that could potentially go from this medical device and assess, perform toxicological risk assessment, and we have the value, it's called margin of safety, and we have to calculate and understand whether it's safe to use this medical device for this audience or not, considering this margin of safety. I'm not toxicologist, I'm just chemist who is doing biological evaluation, but it's like a very high level approach how to do it. There are a lot of tricks here because we have to consider uncertainty factors, also like no observe adverse events, etc., etc.
Hmm.
But it's like, I believe high level is enough.
Yeah, no, that's great. I really appreciate you going through, especially the difference in extractables and leachables. I don't think I could have articulated
Welcome.
it that well, so that was great. Um, It makes sense. It sounds like, though, I could see a company looking at this and saying, okay, Marina's over there. I'm going to take her the device. She's going to do her thing. Then we're going to get back to business. That's not really the way it should be, but I can see companies maybe treating biological safety or biocompatibility this way. And you can correct me if I'm wrong. What does it mean in practical terms, to really evaluate that or integrate that into your QMS? Or is it possible with design control, supplier management, CAPA? Do you have any thoughts or opinions on that?
Absolutely, yes. I also did a series of posts on LinkedIn that biocompatibility is not a bubble and it must be integrated into quality management system. Why? Because quite a lot of different events can trigger biological evaluation. For instance, changes in design, changes in material. So here we go, we have direct connection with change management process. Also, right now, there is more and more emphasis on using post-market surveillance data, because one thing is to evaluate medical device during design verification phase, and another thing when the medical device is kind of test drive on real patient in actual clinical use. So we have to consider this information, and boom, here we have direct connection with post-market surveillance. Surely risk management, because biological evaluation is based on risk management
Yeah.
process. Okay. Another thing you mentioned, it's about CAPA, and here it also connected. Why? Because we can have some complaints that related to biological hazards, for instance, and in this way we have to have a look into our biological safety and consider what is the risk here, whether it's low risk or high risk or moderate risk, and also take some steps, like for instance, perform some additional investigation, or for instance, even perform some additional testing if required. If we have this quite a lot of complaints related to specifically to biological hazards, not like all
Yeah.
possible complaints, you know. So yeah, biocomp is not a bubble, and that's why I also said that biocompatibility is not just a science, it's about communication, because we have to talk to each other and information should flow freely here, because we need to know what's going on. Another thing that I would like highlight separately is changes related to different regulations, because we have to be aware, like for instance, carcinogenic, mutagenic, toxic to reproduction list has been updated with a specific chemical, and we have to check whether our medical devices contain this chemical or not. And if they contain, we have to update our biological evaluation, because we need to perform analysis whether it's still safe or we need to do something with it, you know.
Yeah.
uh, yeah, so quite a
Yeah.
lot of connections, as you may see.
Absolutely. I think every system within your QMS should know how the device touches the body and know
Yeah,
how, how the changes or the suggested changes should
yeah,
would impact other people. I can just imagine we really hit on the watch. So let's go with clothes. Let's say you have a medical device that's a wearable, I don't know, of some
okay,
sort. And and one person complains about it itches or it caused a rash in me or something like that. I'm
yeah,
saying, okay, well, you're just you probably I don't know if you write it off as the person is different than the rest of the population, that's not really helpful, but it could be an input into your risk management to say, okay, maybe a
absolutely,
few
yes.
things need to be evaluated. Um,
Yeah,
are there reactive versus proactive mindset shifts that could happen? And do you see, well, let me kind of reel that back in.
please.
Um, I can a lot in a lot of different ways. I see companies that are reactive versus proactive.
Yep,
QMS is a good one. CAPA is a good one. All of these can be examples of a reactive mindset versus a proactive mindset. What about
yep.
with biocompatibility? Are there companies that you see doing it a lot better than others, and why?
You know, I strongly believe that this publication of a new version of ISO 10993-1, a lot of companies would uh, forced to apply proactive approach. Why? Because a new revision of this ISO standard tells us that we have to assess biological safety throughout whole life cycle of medical device. And even when we have just prototype phase, okay, we have to evaluate whether these materials are safe. And unfortunately, I still can see that it rather it's unfortunately it's not still proactive, but we are going to it, because look, we have changed these checkbox approaches, and right now more and more companies like, okay, it seems like we need to do some literature review, you know, and they're doing it, and they are having publications, and they are doing quite a lot of work related to biological evaluation, as well as, but I still can feel that there is such kind of, you know, thinking that, okay, we just need to send this medical device sample to the lab, get some testing, and that's okay. But no, it doesn't work in this way. You have to know your device and do some homework, at least gathering the materials and analyze these materials. But hopefully with this new revision, things would change.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to hearing more about that at some point here, but we don't have to go into that just at the moment. Um,
Yep.
I know in the previous conversations you've talked about how you train other or train different teams at companies, cross-functional teams. How do you explain some of these complex biocompatibility aspects to those cross-functional teams, especially if they're non-technical? Are there things you go into with them?
Yeah, that's great question. Thank you very much for asking. I'm trying to use examples and trying to, yeah. So first of all, examples, like I provided this example with allergy, or what is the difference between irritation and sensitization. When I applied this tissue mask on my face, I have got allergy, like almost immediate allergy. So I have got irritation and
Mhm.
sensitization. When I worked in the lab with this nickel solution during long time, I have got this reaction to nickel, and I have got sensitization. So first of all, it's about examples. Secondly, I am explaining like what's going on here and what is a goal. So why we are doing it, or why is it required? For instance, some people are saying like, okay, we did CITA, so we don't need to do irritation and sensitization. And I said like, no, because we have to check different aspects of interaction with human body, because when we are talking about cytotoxicity, we are talking about cells and cytotoxic effect, actually how cells react on it, so it's a bit different than other aspects. So I'm trying to use examples, I'm using simple words, and I'm explaining why we need to do something, or what is this concept, in very simple words, as much as I could actually.
I wonder if there's ever any, well, so when quality talks to marketing, for example, or sales, and I don't know if you ever get that far down the path or upstream, downstream, however
Oh,
you look
I
at that.
had such
Yeah,
experience.
I imagine that there's going to be things sometimes that you have to translate your speak into their language. It's just like when you're talking to a
Yeah,
CEO, you have to have
yeah,
maybe a different way of speaking. If
yeah.
I said something like this material could cause a release in chemicals that maybe causes inflammation, that might mean pain, complaints and recalls, or bad publicity. Okay, now I start paying attention. Maybe I wasn't paying attention yet at pain or irritation, but complaints and recalls and bad PR, I can get that. If I'm not on the technical side, or maybe I'm less empathetic of a person. I don't know. I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but you know what I mean. There's always
Yeah,
the economic drivers really speak
exactly.
loudly sometimes. So
Yeah, absolutely. When talking, for instance, to regulatory affairs, we are talking about deadlines, about submissions, and if we don't start right now, we will fail to meet this deadline, and you will
yeah,
not get this document to your submission for your technical file, for
man, you're
instance.
good.
Or for instance, for quality, if talking to quality, I'm talking like, okay, we have to do something with it. Otherwise, we have to like stop production because we have this complaint and we have to do finally with this, kind of. And yeah, I totally relate, but yeah,
Yeah. She's
absolutely.
got to pick
Because
one of
when
the
you,
speed, cost, quality, which one, yeah, we're going to impact
yeah,
something. Yep.
yeah.
What advice do you have someone giving that would, if someone came into the medtech field or biocompatibility field, any advice that you would give to that person?
Uh, don't be shy and ask the questions. Stay curious, meaning, and don't be afraid to go even deeper to understand the reason, to understand what you don't understand yet, and communicate. Because I believe that communication is the key here, and we have to talk to each other as much as we can because information shall flow.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and maybe that's the answer to the next question. But my last question I wanted to ask you
Yeah.
was if there's one takeaway that you give the audience, or if you wanted them to take away from, what would that be?
About communication.
Communication. Hey,
Yeah, because
we had mentioned maybe a giveaway. Do we have something like that? I should have asked you before we started recording.
uh,
We'll talk about it afterwards. Those are listening,
yeah,
just assume we do
yeah,
and go check the show notes. So at least you can
yeah,
maybe
yeah,
get something from Marina. We'll see what we have if we do.
yeah, yeah,
Maybe we
yeah.
didn't talk about it. So if we didn't, forgive me. So yeah.
All good, all good.
Marina, this was
Mhm.
great. Anything we missed or you feel like you want to just touch on one more time?
No, I believe that's it. I just have a question, but we can discuss it after
Sure.
recording. No, it was so smooth. I love it. No,
Oh
you're so
yeah.
good in interviewing. Thank you
Oh,
so much.
yeah, it was so good talking to you. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you sharing all this information. And I'm looking forward to the webinar in a few months. And I hope those of you
Yeah.
listening are able to attend. It's a chance where you can ask questions directly. We always have the option for you to do that. And even if we don't get all the questions, we forward them on to the presenters. So maybe Marina's able to interact a little bit as well. And I will also say follow her on LinkedIn because she is very active and very educational and entertaining. And it clearly shows that you care about what you're doing. And I think that's really valuable.
Oh, thank you so much. And I'm here, very happy to be here and enjoyed our conversation. And please, everyone, join our webinar in a few months. It would be a lot of fun.
Awesome. All right. We'll let you all get back to the rest of your day. Until next time, take care.